iCon, The Imperfect Genius of Steve Jobs. Chapter 1, The Seeds of Disruption, Childhood and Formative Years. The future architect of the digital age entered the world not with the fanfare of a product launch, but with the quiet dignity of a well-considered adoption. Steve Jobs was born on October 24, 1955, in San Francisco, to Joanne Skeebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali. Unmarried at the time, and facing strong parental objections to their relationship, his biological parents made the difficult decision to put him up for adoption. Their only condition, that he be placed with college graduates. A lawyer initially lined up a couple who met this criterion, but they unexpectedly backed out. As a last-minute resort, the adoption agency called Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple from Mountain View, California. Paul Jobs, a machinist and former Coast Guard veteran, hadn't finished college. Clara Jobs, an accountant, also lacked a degree. Yet, their warmth, financial stability, and genuine desire to adopt children shone through. Despite their lack of formal education, they signed a pledge to put Steve through college, and the adoption proceeded. It was a choice that would profoundly shape Jobs, instilling in him a deep-seated belief that he was chosen, a special individual destined for something great. Later in life, when he sought out his biological parents, the sense of abandonment would mix with this formative feeling of being selected, fueling both his insecurities and his fierce drive. The Jobs family settled into a modest tract home at 2066 Crist Drive in Los Altos, a burgeoning residential area in the Santa Clara Valley. A place that would, in time, become the foundational landscape of Silicon Valley. This wasn't a coincidence. Paul Jobs was a meticulous craftsman. His garage was a sanctuary of mechanical order, filled with tools for working on cars, household electronics, and various repair projects. From an early age, Steve watched his father disassemble and reassemble appliances, marveling at the underlying order and purpose of each component. He taught me how to build things, how to take apart an engine and rebuild it, how to build a good fence, Jobs would later recall. This foundational exposure to the inner workings of machines, combined with his father's insistence on the unseen parts being as well crafted as the visible ones, even the back of the cabinet should be beautifully made, instilled in young Steve a lifelong appreciation for meticulous design, hidden elegance, and the elegant simplicity of engineering. This was a critical seed, far more impactful than any formal classroom lesson. Steve Jobs was not an easy child. He was exceptionally bright, intensely curious, and easily bored by traditional schooling. By fourth grade, he was already considered a handful, prone to pranks and rebellion. He was expelled from school several times. "I had a great fourth-grade teacher who saw through me," he acknowledged. Mrs. Hill, sensing his unique intellect, bribed him with small cash sums and candy to complete his schoolwork. This unconventional approach finally engaged him, and he skipped fifth grade entirely, moving directly to middle school. His formative years coincided with the burgeoning technological revolution simmering just beyond his backyard. The Hewlett-Packard Company, a pioneering electronics firm, was a local legend. Young Steve, already tinkering with electronics, learned to find phone numbers in the directory for engineers at HP, and famously called Bill Hewlett himself to ask for spare parts. To his surprise, Hewlett always obliged. Jobs even secured a summer job assembling frequency counters at HP when he was 13, seeing firsthand the workings of a major tech company. This environment, brimming with engineers, garages filled with circuitry, and the pungent scent of solder in the air, was his natural habitat. His path was increasingly clear, even if not yet fully defined. It was during his teenage years at Homestead High School in Cupertino that Steve Jobs would finally meet the two individuals who would initially shape his destiny: Bill Fernandez and Stephen Wozniak. Fernandez, a slightly older friend, introduced Jobs to Wozniak, a brilliant, unassuming electronics wizard who was 5 years his senior. Wozniak was a pure engineer, driven by the sheer joy of creation. He could design complex circuitry in his head, seemingly without effort, and possessed a remarkable knack for building things that simply worked. He had a penchant for pranks and a boundless enthusiasm for pushing the limits of electronics, much like Jobs. Their first joint venture involved building blue boxes, illegal devices that mimicked telephone tones to make free long-distance calls. While Wozniak saw it as a fun engineering challenge and a testament to his technical prowess, Jobs immediately recognized the market potential. They successfully sold them to fellow students, honing their partnership dynamics. Wozniak the technical genius, Jobs the visionary marketer, and, at times, opportunist. This early experience foreshadowed their future roles precisely. Jobs would later reflect, if it hadn't been for the blue boxes, there would have been no Apple. Beyond the nascent tech scene, the late 1960s and early 1970s in California also brought Jobs into direct contact with the counterculture movement, then in full bloom. He experimented with LSD, explored vegetarianism, and developed a deep interest in Eastern spirituality, particularly Zen Buddhism. These influences were not mere passing fads. They instilled in him a lifelong pursuit of purity, simplicity, and a holistic approach to understanding the world. His brief time at Reed College in Oregon, a liberal arts institution known for its intellectual freedom and unconventionality, further exposed him to a broad range of intellectual curiosity and artistic expression. While he dropped out after just one semester due to lack of interest and the steep financial strain on his struggling parents, he famously audited a calligraphy class taught by Robert Palladino. This seemingly minor detail, the meticulous study of elegant letter forms, serifs, and spacing, would later manifest profoundly in his insistence on beautiful typography and graphical interfaces in early Apple products. He believed that even the unseen details mattered, echoing his father's lessons from the garage and applying them to the digital realm. After Reed, Jobs embarked on a spiritual journey to India with his friend Daniel Koch. He sought enlightenment, hoping to find a guru to guide him. The trip was grueling, marked by poverty, illness, and a degree of disillusionment with the more commercial aspects of spirituality he encountered. Yet it undeniably deepened his appreciation for asceticism and the quest for inner truth. He returned to California a more outwardly intense, inwardly focused individual, shaving his head and wearing traditional Indian clothing. Back in Silicon Valley, Jobs secured a job at Atari, then a burgeoning video game company. Working under Nolan Bushnell, he was exposed to rapid product development and the fast-paced world of consumer electronics. He famously enlisted Wozniak to help him optimize the circuit board for the game Breakout, promising to split the fee, though Jobs later admitted to taking the lion's share of the agreed-upon bonus. This experience further solidified his understanding of user experience and the critical marriage of hardware and software. By the mid-1970s, Steve Jobs was a unique amalgam, a tech enthusiast with a countercultural soul, a spiritual seeker with an undeniable drive for commercial success, and a visionary with a demanding, often abrasive, personality. He possessed an innate understanding of how technology could be made personal and accessible, a perception that entirely eluded the established tech giants like IBM. With Wozniak, he had found the perfect partner, a brilliant creator who lacked Jobs' business acumen and evangelical drive. The stage was set, the components were aligned, and the seeds of a revolution were about to sprout from the unassuming garage on Chris Drive. The world was about to meet Apple. Chapter 2, The Garage and the Apple, Founding a Revolution. The shift from tinkering in a garage to founding a world-changing company often begins with a single, compelling idea. For Steve Wozniak, that idea was a personal computer circuit board. Unlike the complex, expensive mini-computers of the era, Wozniak envisioned something simpler, elegant, and accessible, a board that could be easily assembled by hobbyists. He'd built a prototype in 1975, a terminal that could display characters on a television screen, and demonstrated it to his homebrew computer club peers. It was a marvel of minimalist engineering, a feat of genius that simplified processes many considered impossible. But it was Steve Jobs who recognized its true potential. Where Wozniak saw a fascinating hobby project, Jobs saw a product, a business, a revolution. He wasn't interested in just showing off Wozniak's cleverness. He wanted to sell it. The idea of taking the Apple iCircuit board, as they tentatively called it, to market struck Wozniak as absurd. He was an engineer, not a salesman. But Jobs, with his burgeoning reality distortion field, an almost hypnotic ability to persuade others to believe in his vision despite evidence to the contrary, was relentless. He convinced Wozniak they could not only build these boards but sell them too. Their first real customer was Paul Terrell, owner of the Byte shop in Mountain View, one of the earliest computer retailers. Terrell, skeptical at first, agreed to buy 50 Apple I boards if they came pre-assembled. This was a critical turning point. It transformed the venture from a hobby into a proper business. To fulfill the order, Jobs famously sold his Volkswagen van, and Wozniak sold his Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator, raising just over $1,300 to buy parts. And so, on April 1, 1976, a date ironically chosen by Jobs' Apple Computer Inc., was officially founded. The partnership agreement initially included a third co-founder, Ronald Wayne, an older Atari colleague who drafted the agreement, designed the first Apple logo, and was meant to provide some business experience. However, just 11 days later, plagued by concerns over potential financial liability, Wayne sold his 10% share for $800. It remains one of the most famously ill-timed decisions in business history, a sliver of foresight that cost him billions. The Apple I was a success within its niche. It wasn't a complete computer. Customers still needed to add a case, power supply, keyboard, and monitor. Yet, for the nascent personal computing market, it was a breakthrough. The small, focused operation, largely run out of Jobs' parents' garage, managed to sell about 200 units. Paul Jobs' careful craftsmanship, honed over years, proved invaluable in hand-assembling the boards for those early orders, ensuring a quality that belied their humble origins. The true game-changer, however, was the Apple II. While Wozniak celebrated the Apple I, he immediately looked to the future, dreaming of building an even better machine. He wanted a computer with color graphics, easy expansion slots for peripherals, and a built-in power supply. Jobs, recognizing the Apple II's potential for a much wider audience, insisted on a plastic case that would make the computer feel more approachable and less intimidating than the metal boxes of competitors. He also pushed for a quiet, integrated power supply, a detail that appealed to his emerging sense of elegant engineering and user experience. The Apple II, unlike its predecessor, was designed for the average home user, not just hobbyists. To fund this ambitious endeavor, Jobs sought out serious capital. He founded an AC Mike Markula Jr., a retired Intel marketing manager who, after reviewing their business plan, saw the passion and market potential. Markula not only invested $250,000 of his own money, but also helped secure a $250,000 line of credit from Bank of America. He became an invaluable mentor, bringing financial discipline and business expertise to the young, idealistic founders. Regis McKenna, a seasoned public relations executive, was brought in to craft Apple's early image, creating the brand association with innovation and unconventional thinking. The Apple II was an instant sensation upon its release in 1977. Its combination of user-friendliness, color graphics, and expandable architecture, especially with the introduction of VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet program, which made personal computers relevant for business, drove sales through the roof. Apple rapidly became the fastest-growing company in U.S. history. The company grew from a handful of employees to hundreds, moving out of the garage and into proper offices and manufacturing facilities. The accelerating growth culminated on December 12, 1980, when Apple Computer went public. The IPO generated more capital than any offering since Ford Motor Company in 1956, selling 4.6 million shares at $22 each. Steve Jobs, at just 25 years old, became a billionaire, instantly catapulted into the ranks of the nation's wealthiest entrepreneurs. Wozniak, Markula, and scores of early employees and investors also became instant millionaires. Yet, even amid this overwhelming success, the seeds of future conflicts and character traits were emerging. Jobs' management style, even in these early years, was marked by intense perfectionism and an almost messianic zeal. He could be incredibly inspiring, motivating engineers to achieve feats they thought impossible, but he could also be brutally demanding and unforgiving. His reality distortion field became legendary within the burgeoning company, a force that could make people believe the impossible was not only achievable but imminent. He demanded control over every aspect of the product, from the color of the plastic to the design of the circuit board, believing that true elegance came from complete integration. These early triumphs laid the foundation for Apple's meteoric rise, but also set the stage for the dramatic, often turbulent, chapters that would follow in Steve Jobs' extraordinary life. Chapter 3. Apple's Reign. Early days, vision and conflict. By the turn of the decade, Apple was no longer just a garage startup. It was a burgeoning technology behemoth, poised to challenge the corporate giants of the world. But behind the meteoric rise and the public celebration of the Apple II's success, Steve Jobs hungered for more. He was never content with incremental improvements. His sights were set on the next big leap, a revolutionary machine that would transcend the hobbyist market and bring computing to the masses. This pursuit would lead him down two parallel and often conflicting paths: the Lisa and the Macintosh. The genesis of this new era of computing arguably began with a controversial visit in 1979 to Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. Xerox PARC was a hotbed of innovation, pioneering concepts that would define personal computing for decades. The graphical user interface, GUI, the computer mouse, object-oriented programming, and networked computing. Jobs, along with several Apple engineers, was granted a tour in exchange for deeply discounted Apple stock options. What he saw there captivated him. He immediately grasped the profound significance of using a cursor and mouse to manipulate on-screen icons, realizing it was a far more intuitive and accessible way for ordinary people to interact with computers than typing complex commands. He famously chastised the Xerox executives, asking, "Why aren't you doing anything with this? You've got a gold mine here." Jobs, ever the visionary, saw the commercial potential where Xerox, bogged down by corporate bureaucracy, did not. Back at Apple, the Lisa project was already underway. Named after his first daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, whose paternity he initially denied for years, it was intended to be Apple's next-generation business computer. Jobs immersed himself in the project, pushing the team to incorporate the revolutionary GUI and mouse technologies he had witnessed at PARC. His involvement, however, proved tumultuous. His perfectionism often manifested as abrasive demands, and his legendary reality distortion field could inspire and infuriate in equal measure. He badgered engineers relentlessly, demanding impossibly fast progress and impeccable design. Eventually, the Lisa team, tired of his unpredictable behavior and authoritarian demands, engineered his removal from the project in 1981. It was a humiliating setback for Jobs, but one that unwittingly cleared the path for his next obsession. Freed from the Lisa, Jobs turned his full attention to a less prestigious, lower-priority project within Apple, the Macintosh. He took over the small team, transforming it into a high-energy, almost cult-like unit that operated outside the traditional corporate structure. He famously hung a pirate flag with a skull and crossbones over their building, declaring it better to be a pirate than join the Navy. The Macintosh team embraced his intense focus on user experience and minimalist design. Jobs' obsessive attention to detail was legendary. He insisted on a quiet, fan-less design, a perfectly designed internal board layout, and even signed the inside of the Mac's case along with the rest of the original Mac team, an almost sacred act of creation and ownership. The goal was to create the computer for the rest of us, a machine that was friendly, intuitive, and beautiful. The launch of the Macintosh in 1984 was a theatrical spectacle orchestrated by Jobs. It kicked off with the iconic 1984 Super Bowl advertisement, directed by Ridley Scott. A dystopian visual masterpiece, it depicted a lone female athlete smashing a screen displaying Big Brother, widely understood to represent IBM, thereby positioning Apple as the liberator of information. Then, at the Macworld conference, Jobs, in his signature black turtleneck, unveiled the Mac to a rapturous audience. The moment the computer spoke to the audience, proclaiming, "Hello, I'm Macintosh, and I'm so happy to be with you," was pure Jobsian magic, showcasing his ability to infuse technology with personality and emotion. Initial enthusiasm for the Mac was off the charts. Its graphical interface was revolutionary, captivating users worldwide. However, the Mac had significant limitations. It was expensive, priced at $2,495, lacked critical software beyond a few niche applications, and had limited memory. These shortcomings hampered its broad market penetration, leading to slower sales than projected. This commercial struggle intensified Jobs' already turbulent relationship with Apple's CEO, John Sculley. Jobs had personally recruited Sculley from PepsiCo in 1983, famously asking him, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley, a seasoned marketing executive, initially brought much-needed management structure and financial discipline to Apple. But as Mac sales faltered, and Jobs' management style grew increasingly erratic and confrontational, fueled by his frustration, and a sense of entitlement tensions between the two men escalated into an open power struggle. Jobs believed Sculley was overly cautious and failed to grasp the revolutionary nature of the products, particularly the Macintosh. He attempted to stage a coup, plotting to sideline Sculley and regain full control of Apple's product development. However, Sculley discovered the plot and presented a stark choice to the Apple board of directors. The board, siding with the more stable and experienced CEO, chose Sculley. In May 1985, Steve Jobs was stripped of all operational duties, essentially exiled from the company he co-founded. He was given an office in a remote building, with no direct reports. Unable to endure the humiliation and feeling abandoned by his own creation, Jobs resigned from Apple in September 1985. The rejection from the company he had poured his heart and soul into was a devastating blow, one that would sting for years, but ultimately also fuel his relentless drive to prove his worth. The prodigal genius, once the undisputed king of Apple, was now cast into the wilderness. Chapter 4: The Outcast, NeXT, Pixar, and the Wilderness Years. Being fired from Apple, the company he co-founded, was a shattering blow to Steve Jobs. He later described it as devastating, like being punched in the gut. The public humiliation, the sense of betrayal by his own board and the man he had handpicked, left him adrift and angry. Yet, for a man so profoundly defined by his work and his vision, idleness was not an option. The sting of rejection quickly galvanized into a fierce determination to prove Apple and the world wrong. He would invent a new, even grander future, one piece at a time. Within weeks of his departure from Apple in September 1985, Jobs was already hatching his next venture, NeXT Inc. He didn't leave alone. He convinced a handful of key Apple employees, some of their brightest engineers and managers, to leave with him. This brain drain was a bitter pill for Apple, and they quickly sued Jobs, accusing him of stealing trade secrets. The lawsuit was eventually settled without a clear victory for either side, but it underscored the animosity of Jobs' forced exile. NeXT was conceived as a company that would build the ultimate computer for higher education and scientific research. Jobs envisioned a machine of unparalleled power and elegance, designed for the future of computing. The physical product, the NeXT Cube, launched in 1988, was a marvel of industrial design. Its sleek black magnesium alloy case, a perfect 12-inch cube, spoke volumes about Jobs' aesthetic sensibilities. Inside, it sported a technologically advanced NeXT Step operating system, built on a powerful Unix core, featuring a graphical user interface and object-oriented programming capabilities that were years ahead of their time. Famously, the very first web server and browser, World Wide Web, were developed on a NeXT machine at CERN by Sir Tim Berners-Lee. But the NeXT Cube was plagued by Jobs' characteristic perfectionism, which often prioritized form over function and led to exorbitant costs. The computer was priced at $6,500 for the education market, a prohibitive sum for most students and researchers. Its custom hardware and unique operating system meant a scarcity of third-party software. Jobs, true to form, micromanaged every detail, from the color of the paint on the factory floor to the custom-made screws for the machine's internal components. The infamous hole-in-the-floor anecdote, where Jobs insisted on altering the building's architecture to accommodate a spiraling staircase, epitomized his disregard for budget and convention in pursuit of aesthetic purity. Despite its technological brilliance and the glowing reviews of its software, NeXT's hardware struggled commercially, selling fewer than 50,000 units over its lifespan. While NeXT struggled to gain traction in the hardware market, Jobs made another audacious move that would prove far more financially successful and culturally impactful. In 1986, he purchased the graphics group, George Lucas's computer graphics division, a spin-off from Lucasfilm's special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, for $10 million. Jobs invested $5 million of his own money into the struggling unit and renamed it Pixar. Initially, Pixar wasn't an animation studio. It was a hardware company, selling high-end computer graphics workstations to government agencies and medical imaging professionals. It was not profitable, and Jobs came close to selling it several times, frustrated by the ongoing losses. However, the true talent within Pixar lay not in its hardware, but in its creative individuals, particularly John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, who were experimenting with computer animation. Jobs, with his characteristic patience in certain selective situations, recognized their genius. He gradually shifted Pixar's focus from hardware to animation production. They created a series of critically acclaimed animated shorts, like Luxo Jr. 1986, which showcased the potential of computer-generated imagery. This caught the attention of Disney, leading to a landmark deal in 1991 for Pixar to produce 3 computer-animated feature films. The first of these films, Toy Story, launched in 1995, transcended all expectations. It was a groundbreaking achievement, the first feature-length film created entirely with computer animation. Critics lauded its innovative storytelling, vibrant characters, and stunning visuals. It was a massive commercial success, earning over $360 million worldwide. Pixar's success culminated in its initial public offering, IPO, in November 1995, just a week after Toy Story opened. Jobs, who owned 80% of Pixar, saw his stake soar to over $1.2 billion, instantly making him a billionaire again and solidifying his financial recovery from his Apple departure. Jobs' time in the wilderness at NeXT and Pixar, though often frustrating, was a period of invaluable learning and growth. He learned the harsh realities of the hardware business from NeXT's struggles, reinforcing his belief that integrated hardware and software was the key to success. He also saw how potent the NeXT Step operating system was, a modern, robust platform far superior to Apple's aging System 7. At Pixar, he learned the art of creative management, fostering an environment where artists could thrive. He gained financial independence, giving him the freedom to act on his convictions without needing permission from a board. He refined his vision for user experience and elegant design, understanding that the content and software were just as crucial, if not more so, than the hardware. This decade-long exile, rather than breaking him, forged a more mature, though still intensely demanding, leader. As Apple floundered, struggling to find its footing, the stage was inadvertently being set for the prodigal's return. Chapter 5. The Prodigal's Return, Rescuing Apple and the iMac Era. By the mid-1990s, the company Steve Jobs had co-founded was in freefall. Apple Computer, once a beacon of innovation and a symbol of rebellion against the computing establishment, had become a cautionary tale of corporate mismanagement and lost direction. After Jobs' departure in 1985, a succession of CEOs, John Sculley, Michael Spindler, and Gil Amelio, had presided over a steady decline. The company suffered from a bloated product line, an aging operating system, fierce competition from Microsoft and Intel's Wintel alliance, and a baffling lack of focus. Apple was losing over $1 billion a year, hemorrhaging market share, and clinging to relevance by a thread. Bankruptcy was a very real, very imminent threat. The biggest technical challenge facing Apple was its operating system. Mac OS, while still beloved by its users, was based on decades-old architecture and lacked modern capabilities like true multitasking or memory protection. Failed internal projects, like the ambitious but ill-fated Co-Planned, had left Apple scrambling for a viable next-generation OS. In a desperate search for a modern platform, Apple considered several options, including BOS from B Inc., a company founded by former Apple executive Jean-Louis Gasset. But then, a fateful alternative emerged: NeXT Step. This is where serendipity intervened. Apple decided to acquire NeXT Inc., Steve Jobs' struggling computer company, in December 1996 for $429 million. The primary appeal was NeXT Step, a remarkably advanced and stable operating system that could serve as the foundation for Apple's future. The acquisition brought not only the software, but also, unexpectedly, its intensely driven founder. Jobs returned to Apple, initially as an informal advisor to then-CEO Gil Amelio, who was struggling desperately to turn the ship around. Jobs, however, was not content to remain an advisor. He quickly and keenly observed Apple's deep-seated problems, its political infighting, and its lack of clear leadership. He began quietly to assert his influence, making strategic suggestions to Amelio while subtly gaining favor with the board. Apple's stock continued to plummet, and Amelio's reign was marked by continued losses and little hope of recovery. By July 1997, Jobs had orchestrated a boardroom coup. Amelio was out, and Jobs, in a poetic twist of fate, was back as Apple's interim CEO, the iCEO, for a symbolic salary of $1 a year. He famously quipped that he worked for the minimum wage to retain his health benefits. His return was marked by a swift, brutal, and necessary restructuring. Jobs immediately began wielding the axe. He halted the licensing of Mac OS to clone manufacturers, a move that alienated a small portion of the market but allowed Apple to regain control over its hardware and software integration. He slashed unprofitable product lines, simplifying Apple's overwhelming and confusing catalog into a clear 2x2 matrix: consumer desktop, consumer portable, pro desktop, pro portable. Projects like the Newton PDA, once hailed as innovative, were unceremoniously killed, despite the emotional attachment many had to them. Thousands of employees were laid off. It was a painful purge, but it stopped the bleeding, focusing Apple's remaining resources on a few key areas. The most controversial, yet strategically brilliant, move was forging a peace treaty with Apple's perceived archenemy, Microsoft. At Macworld in August 1997, Jobs announced a shocking partnership. Microsoft would invest $150 million in non-voting Apple stock and commit to developing Microsoft Office for the Mac for 5 years. The audience initially booed, unable to comprehend the perceived betrayal. But Jobs coolly explained it. "We have to let go of the idea that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. If we want to move forward and get Apple healthy again, we have to let go of that." It was a pragmatic, life-saving decision, ensuring Apple would not be starved of vital software. With the financial and structural foundations shored up, Jobs turned his attention to a public relations campaign that would redefine Apple's identity. The result was the iconic Think Different campaign, launched in 1997, featuring black-and-white footage of historical figures like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Pablo Picasso, and Mahatma Gandhi. It positioned Apple not as a computer company, but as a champion of creativity, innovation, and rebellion against the status quo, a brand for the crazy ones. It was a stroke of marketing genius, rebuilding Apple's battered image and re-establishing its aspirational brand around the concept of ingenuity. What Apple needed next was a product to prove its newfound philosophy. Jobs found his partner in Jony Ive, a brilliant industrial designer who had been on the verge of leaving Apple during its chaotic years. Jobs immediately recognized Ive's talent and vision, and together, they embarked on the creation of a product that would scream, "Apple is back." The result was the original iMac, unveiled in 1998. It was a radical departure from the beige boxes that dominated the PC market. Designed around simplicity and connectivity, it was an all-in-one computer housed in a translucent, Bondi blue, and later, other vibrant colors, plastic casing. The I in iMac stood for Internet and individualism. With a focus on ease of setup, no more IT department in a box. The iMac was designed for consumers who wanted to get online quickly and simply. It controversially eschewed floppy disk drives in favor of USB ports and a CD-ROM drive, a bold move that anticipated the shift towards digital media. The iMac wasn't just a computer. It was a design statement. It was fun, approachable, and impossible to ignore. Its launch was a massive commercial success, selling 800,000 units in its first 5 months and quickly becoming the best-selling computer in Apple's history. The iMac not only saved Apple from the brink of collapse, but also reignited its reputation for design innovation and user-friendly technology. Beyond the product, Jobs began to redefine the Apple retail experience, recognizing that the way customers bought products was as important as the products themselves. He envisioned dedicated Apple stores, clean, minimalist spaces where customers could try out products, receive direct support, and immerse themselves in the Apple ecosystem. The first 2 Apple stores opened in 2001, initially met with skepticism by retail analysts. But they quickly became benchmarks for service and customer engagement, transforming the entire retail industry. With the iMac, Apple had not only stabilized its finances, but had also found its voice again. Jobs had proven that his vision for tightly integrated, elegantly designed products could resonate with the public. More importantly, he had laid the groundwork for his next, even more audacious, visions for Apple. The digital hub strategy, which would soon bring music, and then the entire mobile world, under Apple's rapidly expanding sphere of influence. The wilderness years were over. Apple's second act had just begun. Chapter 6, Music in His Pocket, the iPod and the Digital Hub Strategy. With Apple pulled back from the brink by the iMac, Steve Jobs had the breathing room to pursue the next great leap. He wasn't simply interested in computers. He was interested in how computers could integrate into and enrich people's lives. His gaze turned to the nascent world of digital music, a landscape in profound chaos. The late 1990s and early 2000s had witnessed the explosion of MP3 technology and the phenomenon of illegal file-sharing services like Napster. Consumers eagerly embraced the ability to download music, while the music industry, paralyzed by fear and lacking a viable digital strategy, reacted with lawsuits and condemnation. Jobs saw not a threat, but an immense opportunity. He articulated what he called the Digital Hub strategy at Macworld in January 2001. The personal computer, specifically the Macintosh, would serve as the central brain, the hub, for a person's digital life. It would manage and organize all forms of digital media, photos, home movies, and most importantly, music. To fulfill this vision, Apple developed applications like iPhoto, iMovie, and then, crucially, iTunes. Launched in January 2001, iTunes was a simple, intuitive piece of software designed to organize, play, and burn digital music. It was good, but it lacked a portable companion that truly encapsulated the digital hub experience. Jobs believed that the dominant portable MP3 players on the market at the time were clunky, user-unfriendly, and technologically unsophisticated. His team, tasked with building a better player, worked under intense secrecy and a tight deadline. They did not aim for the first MP3 player, but the best. Led by John Rubinstein, hardware engineering, and Tony Fadell, who came from General Magic with experience in handhelds, the team raced to integrate existing technologies. They leveraged a tiny 1.8-inch Toshiba hard drive and a unique scroll wheel user interface developed by a company called Portal Player. The result was unveiled on October 23, 2001. The iPod, in typical Jobsian fashion, he walked on stage and dramatically declared, "Today, Apple is going to introduce a breakthrough new product. An iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket." Priced at $399, the device was not cheap, but its sleek, minimalist design, ease of use, and seamless integration with iTunes immediately distinguished it from competing clunkers. It wasn't just a portable music player. It was an extension of your digital library, always in sync with your Mac. The true genius emerged 2 years later. While the original iPod was a hit, the music industry still resisted legal digital distribution. Jobs, with his legendary negotiation skills, convinced the major record labels, one by one, to abandon their complex pricing models and embrace a revolutionary concept: selling individual songs for 99 cents each. It was a fixed price, a simple price, and a price that respected the value of music while making it incredibly accessible. On April 28, 2003, Apple launched the iTunes Music Store. It was an instant phenomenon. Within its first week, it sold over 1 million songs. For the first time, consumers had a legal, easy-to-use, and affordably priced alternative to piracy. The iTunes Music Store rapidly became the largest music retailer in the United States, and eventually, the world. It completely transformed the music industry, shifting the focus from album sales to individual track purchases and demonstrating the immense power of digital distribution combined with an elegant user experience. The iPod continued its meteoric rise, evolving through successive, ever slimmer, and more colorful iterations: the iPod Mini, Nano, Shuffle, and Photo. Each new model further cemented Apple's dominance in the portable music market. The white earpods that came with every iPod became a ubiquitous symbol of status and cultural savvy, signaling that you were part of the Apple ecosystem. The success of the iPod had a profound halo effect for Apple's other products. Millions of Windows users, attracted by the iPod, were suddenly exposed to iTunes and, by extension, to Apple's software and design philosophy. Many of them would eventually switch to Macintosh computers, recognizing the integrated experience that Jobs had relentlessly championed. The burgeoning network of Apple stores, which had opened their doors in 2001, further supported the iPod's growth, offering customers a hands-on experience and excellent technical support. The iPod wasn't just a product. It was a cultural phenomenon. It placed music literally in the palms of hundreds of millions of people, changing how they curated, consumed, and shared their audio lives. It cemented Steve Jobs' reputation as a visionary who could identify consumer needs before consumers themselves knew they had them, and then deliver a product that was so superior, so intuitive, that it redefined an entire industry. With the iPod, Apple had proven it could dominate not just the computer market, but the burgeoning world of consumer electronics. This success, however, would merely be a prelude to an even greater revolution waiting in the wings. Chapter 7: Reinventing the Phone, the iPhone Revolution. After the resounding success of the iPod, Steve Jobs could have rested on his laurels. Apple had become the dominant force in digital music and was a company clearly on the ascent. But Jobs was never satisfied. He saw a new problem emerging: the convergence of technologies. People were carrying multiple devices: an iPod for music, a phone for calls, and perhaps a Palm or BlackBerry for email and basic internet access. Jobs found the existing smartphones of the era clunky, difficult to use, and certainly not insanely great. He harbored a particular disdain for styluses and tiny physical keyboards, believing they hindered natural human interaction. His unease with the status quo was intensified by Apple's own foray into the mobile phone market. In 2005, a partnership with Motorola yielded the ROKR E1, a music phone that awkwardly integrated iTunes but was limited in its functionality and design. Jobs was reportedly disgusted with the ROKR. It confirmed his conviction that Apple needed to build its own phone, controlling every aspect of the experience from hardware to software. The idea for an Apple phone had been brewing for years, sometimes even predating the iPod. Apple had even considered building a tablet computer in the early 2000s, and much of the early multi-touch research that would later define the iPhone originated from that project. Jobs, with his uncanny ability to see distant connections, realized that this multi-touch technology, combined with a powerful mobile operating system, could unlock an entirely new category of phone. Thus began Project Purple, a highly secretive undertaking within Apple. Teams were sequestered, working under extreme pressure and often without knowing the full scope of the project. There were intense internal debates. Should it be an advanced iPod with phone capabilities or a full computer in a phone? Jobs, true to his vision, pushed for the latter. The engineering challenges were immense: fitting a sophisticated computer, a large screen, and a robust battery into a thin, elegant form factor. Jony Ive and his design team meticulously sculpted the device's aesthetics, while software engineers labored to adapt Mac OS X for the small, touch-based screen. The world got its first glimpse of the product of Project Purple on January 9, 2007, at the Macworld Conference in San Francisco. Steve Jobs delivered perhaps the most iconic keynote presentation of his career. Dressed in his usual black turtleneck and jeans, he began by telling the crowd, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." He then proceeded to list 3 revolutionary products. The first one is an iPod, a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone, and the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. He repeated the list, building suspense before proclaiming, "Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone." The audience erupted. Jobs then proceeded to demonstrate the iPhone's miraculous capabilities. The intuitive multi-touch gestures like pinch to zoom and flick to scroll, the clean interface, the seamless integration of phone, music, and internet browsing. He made a call to Jony Ive live on stage, navigated through Google Maps, and showed off the visual voicemail. It was a masterclass in product unveiling, demonstrating a complete vision rather than just a list of features. Initial reactions from competitors were a mix of skepticism and dismissal. Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer famously scoffed that the iPhone had no chance of gaining significant market share due to its price and lack of physical keyboard. Many industry analysts, too, questioned its viability. The initial model had several limitations, including a dependence on AT&T's exclusive network in the US, no third-party app support, and a higher price point than most other smartphones. However, the iPhone was clearly a device ahead of its time. It created an entirely new user experience that was vastly superior to anything on the market. Consumers lined up for blocks at Apple stores and AT&T locations on June 29, 2007, when the iPhone finally went on sale. Despite its initial limitations, it sold millions of units in its first year, far exceeding expectations. The true revolutionary moment for the iPhone, however, came a year later, in July 2008, with the launch of the App Store. Initially, Jobs was resistant to allowing third-party applications on the iPhone, preferring to maintain tight control over the user experience and security. But developers were clamoring for access, and Jobs, famously flexible when presented with compelling evidence, changed his mind. The App Store was born, creating an entirely new ecosystem where developers could create and sell applications directly to iPhone users. It was an unprecedented success. Within months, apps became a phenomenon, turning the iPhone into a customizable, infinitely adaptable device that could do virtually anything. The App Store didn't just sell software, it created an industry. It spawned countless startups, generated billions of dollars, and cemented the iPhone's dominance. It forced every other mobile manufacturer to scramble to replicate Apple's success, leading to the smartphone revolution we know today. The iPhone cemented Steve Jobs' legacy as a product visionary on an unmatched scale. He didn't just iterate on existing ideas, he reimagined them, stripping away complexity to reveal profound simplicity. He didn't just make a phone. He orchestrated a paradigm shift that fundamentally altered how billions of people interact with technology, information, and each other. The iPod had put music in our pockets. The iPhone put the internet and a world of possibilities in our hands. Chapter 8, Post-PC Era, iPad and the Future of Computing. Even as the iPhone was soaring to unprecedented heights, cementing Apple's dominance in the mobile space, Steve Jobs harbored a secret ambition that predated even the iPhone's conception: the creation of a tablet computer. The multi-touch technology that served as the iPhone's backbone had originally been conceived for a tablet interface. For years, Jobs had envisioned a device that would bridge the gap between the smartphone and the laptop, a device that was more intimate and immediate than a notebook, yet more capable than a phone. He believed there was a significant space in the digital ecosystem for this new category of personal device. While prototypes of tablets had existed since the early 2000s, Jobs repeatedly put the project on hold, recognizing that the technology, and more importantly, the market, wasn't yet ready. The iPhone needed to come first, to establish the multi-touch interface and cultivate the mass adoption of mobile computing. Once the iPhone had redefined the phone, the path was clear for the tablet to emerge not as a mere scaled-up smartphone, but as a new class of device with its own distinct purpose and user experience. The development of the iPad, though highly secretive, proceeded with Jobs' customary intensity. Every detail was scrutinized. The challenge was to take the intuitive multi-touch interface and the accessible operating system of the iPhone and adapt it for a larger screen, ensuring it still felt simple, natural, and magical. The focus was on content consumption, browsing the web, reading books, watching movies, playing games, and consuming digital media in a comfortable, personal way. Jobs wanted the device to disappear into the experience, making the interaction with content feel as natural as possible. The world was finally introduced to the iPad on January 27, 2010, at a special event in San Francisco. Steve Jobs, looking a bit thinner but still radiating his characteristic charisma, held up the sleek, thin device. He sat in an armchair on stage, demonstrating how naturally one could browse the web, scroll through photos, read an ebook, and play a game. He presented it not as a revolutionary step, but almost as an obvious one, positioning it as a device that was better at doing these important things than either a smartphone or a laptop. The initial reaction from critics and industry observers was mixed. Many questioned its utility. "It's just a giant iPhone," some scoffed. "What's it for?" Others wondered, claiming it didn't offer anything truly new that a phone or laptop couldn't already do. Some commentators pointed to Microsoft's earlier tablet PC efforts, which had largely failed to gain traction, concluding that the tablet form factor just wasn't compelling for the mainstream. However, once consumers got their hands on it, those doubts quickly vanished. The iPad sold 300,000 units on its launch day and over 3 million in its first 3 months. Its intuitive interface, gorgeous screen, and the burgeoning ecosystem of App Store applications tailored for the larger display proved irresistible. It wasn't just a content consumption device. It became an invaluable tool for education, healthcare, enterprise, and casual creativity. The iPad didn't just compete with existing categories. It created an entirely new market for tablet computing, which Apple would dominate for years. The iPad solidified Jobs' vision of what he famously termed the post-PC era. For decades, the personal computer, desktop, or laptop had been the central hub of people's digital lives, where all digital files were stored, organized, and synced. But Jobs argued that this was changing. The advent of powerful, intuitive mobile devices like the iPhone and iPad meant that for many people, these devices would become their primary computing tools. The traditional PC, while still necessary for certain power users, would become less central, like a truck compared to the more common car of a smartphone or tablet. To truly enable this post-PC vision, Apple needed to move beyond the computer as a hub. The solution was the cloud. Jobs had a vision for seamless integration, your content, your settings, your apps, being automatically synced across all your devices, wirelessly, effortlessly. This led to the development of iCloud, Apple's suite of cloud services. Launched in 2011, iCloud was intended to just work, providing automatic backups, synchronization of data, and making the user experience across Apple devices even more fluid. Jobs presented iCloud at WWDC in June 2011, one of his last major public appearances. The iPad, along with Jobs' conceptualization of the post-PC era and the introduction of iCloud, represented the culmination of his product philosophies. He continued to advocate for simplicity in design, powerful integration of hardware and software, and a user experience so intuitive it felt magical. These principles, honed over decades, were the bedrock of Apple's success during his second tenure. He had not only saved Apple, he had redefined its future, and in doing so, had profoundly reshaped the way the world interacted with information and technology, right up to the very end of his extraordinary life. Chapter 9, The Zen of Design, Aesthetics, Simplicity, and Perfection. More than any other technology leader of his generation, Steve Jobs understood that true innovation went beyond raw processing power, megahertz, or gigabytes. For Jobs, technology was an art form. He believed that products should not just function well, but should also be beautiful, intuitive, and spiritually uplifting. This philosophy, a blend of Eastern aesthetics, Californian counterculture, and relentless perfectionism, was the bedrock of his transformative impact and can be summarized as the Zen of design. The roots of this aesthetic sensibility can be traced back to his brief, impactful time at Reed College. While he dropped out of formal study, he audited a calligraphy class taught by Robert Palladino. Here, Jobs delved into the artistry of typography, the nuances of serifs and sans serifs, the varying space between letter combinations, the beauty of elegant typefaces. Years later, when developing the original Macintosh, he famously insisted on incorporating multiple beautiful fonts, a radical concept in an industry then dominated by monochrome, blocky characters. He articulated this influence at his 2005 Stanford commencement speech, stating that the calligraphy class had no practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me, and we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. This was not just about looks. It was about the subtle integration of beauty into function. Upon his return to Apple in 1997, Jobs quickly identified Jony Ive, Apple's head of industrial design, as his intellectual and spiritual counterpart. Ive, who had been on the verge of leaving the company, shared Jobs's passion for purity of form, material, and user experience. Their partnership became the critical engine for Apple's design triumphs. They would spend countless hours together in the design studio, lovingly referred to as the design bunker, exploring materials, prototypes, and concepts, often over a glass of red wine. Their shared vision was to strip away all unnecessary complexities, to achieve a state of less but better. Simplicity was not merely an aesthetic choice. It was an unrelenting pursuit that drove every aspect of Apple's product development. It meant eliminating buttons, streamlining interfaces, and making complex technology feel effortlessly intuitive. Jobs's mantra of "it just works" was the ultimate expression of this drive. It encapsulated the seamless integration of hardware and software, where the user didn't need to understand the underlying mechanics, only the magical result. This belief extended even to how products were packaged. The unboxing experience of an Apple product was METICULOUSLY Chinese letter ED to be as satisfying and elegant as the device itself. Jobs's obsession with detail was legendary. He cared about the internal layout of the computer, even if no user would ever see it, insisting that it be as beautiful as the exterior. He demanded the highest quality materials, aluminum, glass, and stainless steel, that felt premium to the touch and withstood the test of time. He envisioned Apple's retail stores not just as places of transaction, but as living, breathing extensions of the Apple brand, meticulously designed to reflect the same values of simplicity, craftsmanship, and user experience found in its products. This level of control stemmed from Jobs's unwavering belief in vertical integration. Unlike the fragmented PC industry, where different companies made operating systems, processors, and hardware, Jobs believed that true innovation and the creation of magical experiences could only happen when one entity controlled the entire stack. This allowed Apple to optimize every component, every line of code, to work in perfect harmony, resulting in products that were not just technically superior, but also aesthetically cohesive and profoundly user-friendly. The reality distortion field, often cited for its power to bend employees to Jobs's will, also played a crucial role in design. It was this same force that pushed the design and engineering teams to achieve feats that seemed impossible. Jobs would challenge them relentlessly, demanding impossible deadlines and seemingly contradictory features, pushing them beyond their perceived limits to achieve breakthroughs in miniaturization, battery life, and materials science. The iPhone and iPad were perhaps the quintessential embodiments of Jobs's Zen of design. They stripped away physical keyboards, replacing them with a vast, responsive touchscreen. The gestures became the interface. The multi-touch system allowed for intuitive interactions like pinch-to-zoom and flick-to-scroll, making the technology feel like an extension of the user's hand. This was not just about making products look good. It was about shaping human behavior to make technology feel natural, approachable, and empowering. Steve Jobs' legacy in design extends far beyond Apple. His insistence on aesthetics, simplicity, and an integrated user experience irrevocably changed the landscape of consumer electronics. Companies across industries, from furniture to automobiles, began to prioritize design in ways they never had before, realizing that Jobs had tapped into a fundamental human desire for products that were not just tools, but objects of beauty and sources of delight. The zen of design, cultivated over a lifetime, became his most enduring contribution to the world. Chapter 10: The Human Dimension: Leadership, Relationships, and Flaws. To understand Steve Jobs, one must reconcile the contradictory forces that raged within him. He was at once a visionary and a tyrant, a spiritual seeker and a brutal businessman, a charismatic leader who could inspire extraordinary devotion while simultaneously causing profound pain to those around him. His complex personality was inextricably linked to his achievements, a unique blend of brilliance and deeply rooted flaws that defined his leadership, shaped his relationships, and ultimately left an indelible mark on his legacy. At the heart of Jobs' unique leadership style was what was famously dubbed the reality distortion field by his early Macintosh team members. Coined by Bud Tribble, this term described Jobs' uncanny ability to convince himself and others of anything, regardless of how improbable it seemed. He could manipulate perceptions, dismiss facts, and inspire a level of belief in his vision that pushed people to achieve the seemingly impossible. It was a potent tool for innovation, allowing him to demand features and deadlines that lesser leaders would deem insane. But it could also be emotionally exhausting and disorienting for those subjected to its force. His demand for perfection was absolute and unyielding. Jobs subscribed to the A-team philosophy. Only the best talent, a few dozen individuals, could create truly great products. He could be extraordinarily charming and persuasive when recruiting these individuals, drawing them in with the promise of changing the world. Once on his team, however, he could be merciless. He had zero tolerance for mediocrity, or what he called bozo eruptions. He would publicly humiliate employees, belittle their work, or suddenly fire them without warning, leaving a trail of bruised egos and shattered careers. He often created immense pressure within his teams, breeding a culture of fear of failure, but also one of intense dedication and a shared purpose in achieving Jobs' seemingly impossible goals. His famous quote, "My job is to not be easy on people. My job is to make them better," offered a glimpse into his self-justified intensity. Jobs' relationships with the key figures in his life were often as complex and transformative as his products. His bond with Steve Wozniak was the genesis of Apple. Wozniak, the pure engineer, and Jobs, the visionary and salesman, were an ideal pairing. Yet, their differences ultimately led to a painful distancing. Wozniak felt Jobs took too much credit, often downplaying Woz's technical contributions, and eventually stepped away from Apple, disillusioned by the corporate direction. Their relationship remained respectful but distant, a testament to the strain of their contrasting personalities. His relationship with John Sculley, the PepsiCo executive he famously lured to Apple, began with great promise. However, their contrasting management styles, Sculley's corporate conservatism versus Jobs' rebellious product zeal, led to an inevitable clash. The ensuing power struggle and Jobs' ultimate ousting from Apple left a deep wound, shaping his entrepreneurial spirit in the wilderness years and making him even more determined to maintain control upon his return. Later in life, a grudging respect developed between Jobs and his longtime rival, Bill Gates. Their relationship was often contentious, marked by competition and mutual mistrust. Yet, a famous onstage interview in 2007, at the D5 conference, revealed a deeper understanding and appreciation for each other's unique contributions to the tech world. Gates acknowledged Jobs' design sensibility, while Jobs praised Gates' business acumen. Jobs' final and most crucial professional relationship was with Tim Cook. Cook, the quiet, operations genius, initially seemed an unlikely successor to the flamboyant Jobs. Their strengths were complementary. Jobs was the visionary, the showman, the product ideator. Cook was the meticulous executor, the supply chain master, the leader who could deliver on Jobs's grand designs. Jobs recognized Cook's unique ability to manage Apple day-to-day, allowing Jobs to remain focused on product strategy and keynotes. His personal life, too, was a tapestry of profound connections and equally profound struggles. His relationship with his first daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, whom he initially denied paternity of for years, was famously complex and painful. It remained a source of regret for both of them, though they eventually reconciled. His marriage to Lauren Powell Jobs in 1991, and their 3 children Reed, Aaron, and Eve, provided him with a sense of stability and grounding that had often been absent in his earlier life. Lauren was a fierce protector of his privacy and a calming influence on a turbulent soul. Jobs's personality was a blend of contradictions. His interest in Zen Buddhism instilled in him a desire for simplicity, mindfulness, and a disdain for material clutter, yet he was driven by an insatiable ambition for commercial success. He sought purity in design but could be ruthless in business. There were clear instances of his flaws: his reported manipulation, his denial of paternity, his sometimes cruel treatment of subordinates. He could be incredibly generous with his time and insights for those he admired, yet cold and dismissive towards others. Ultimately, Steve Jobs was a deeply human figure, imperfect and complex, yet capable of superhuman feats of vision and execution. His journey, marked by both soaring triumphs and humiliating failures, reveals a man who was relentlessly driven by an innate desire to build something insanely great, to create things that would make a dent in the universe. It was this singular focus, combined with his flawed yet potent personality, that allowed him to not only reshape technology, but also to challenge the very nature of human interaction with the digital world. Chapter 11. The Fight for Life, Illness, Resilience, and Succession. For a man who had such a profound and visible impact on the global stage, Steve Jobs was fiercely private about his personal life, especially his health. This privacy, understandable in a public figure, became intertwined with his final, most arduous battle: a decade-long fight against pancreatic cancer that would test his famous resilience and ultimately lead to a carefully orchestrated succession plan for the company he loved. The initial diagnosis came in October 2003. Doctors discovered a neuroendocrine tumor in his pancreas, a rare and slow-growing form of cancer, unlike the more common and aggressive pancreatic adenocarcinoma. The prognosis for this specific type of tumor was far more favorable, especially if treated promptly. However, in a decision that baffled and frustrated his medical team, Jobs initially resisted conventional surgical treatment. Instead, he opted for alternative medicine, including special diets, acupuncture, herbal remedies, and hydrotherapy, which he believed would cleanse and heal his body. For 9 crucial months, he delayed the life-saving surgery, a choice many later speculated might have affected the long-term outcome of his illness. In July 2004, under increasing pressure from his family and board members, Jobs finally underwent a Whipple procedure, a complex surgery to remove the tumor. The surgery was successful, and for a time, it seemed he had beaten the disease. He returned to Apple with renewed vigor, launching the iPod mini, the transition to Intel processors, and the first Apple stores. Publicly, he remained evasive about his health, leading to rampant speculation whenever he appeared noticeably thinner or frail. But the cancer, or aspects of it, returned and spread. For years, Jobs managed his illness with a tight circle of trust, including his family, close friends, and a dedicated team of doctors. His increasing frailty, however, became harder to conceal. In January 2009, he took a 6-month medical leave of absence, citing a hormone imbalance to disguise the true nature of his condition. During this time, he underwent a liver transplant in Memphis, Tennessee, necessitated by complications from the cancer's spread. Doctors later revealed that the liver was already well advanced with tumors. Despite his deteriorating health, Jobs remained relentlessly devoted to Apple. He continued to lead key product development, his voice often cracking with passion at product launches, his signature, "one more thing" moments as compelling as ever. He oversaw the launch of the iPad in 2010 and the development of iCloud in 2011, making significant public appearances that, while inspiring, also betrayed his profound physical decline. The black turtleneck, once a power statement, now sometimes seemed to hang loosely on his increasingly gaunt frame. As his health worsened in 2011, making it difficult for him to perform his daily duties, Jobs and the Apple board began to carefully plan his succession. This was an unprecedented challenge: to replace a visionary founder who was not only the face of the company, but also its driving creative force. Jobs had been quietly preparing his leadership team for years, entrusting greater responsibilities to key executives. The clear choice for his successor was Tim Cook, the quiet, meticulous chief operating officer who had seamlessly stepped in during Jobs' previous medical leaves. Cook's operational genius and ability to execute Jobs' vision made him the ideal candidate to steer Apple into its next chapter. On August 24, 2011, Steve Jobs officially resigned as CEO of Apple Inc., sending shockwaves around the world. In a letter to the board and the Apple community, he stated simply that he could no longer meet his duties and expectations as CEO. He recommended Cook as his successor, and himself assumed the role of chairman of the board, a position from which he hoped to continue to provide guidance and oversight. His final appearance was a quiet, solemn event in September 2011 at a Cupertino City Council meeting, where he presented plans for Apple's futuristic spaceship campus, a project that would stand as a final testament to his architectural and spatial design sensibilities. Less than 6 weeks later, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at his home in Palo Alto, surrounded by his family. His death, at the age of 56, was officially attributed to complications from pancreatic cancer. The world mourned the loss of a titan. Tributes poured in from global leaders, industry rivals, and countless individuals whose lives had been tangibly touched by his innovations. Flags were flown at half-mast, and Apple stores became impromptu memorials, adorned with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Though his physical presence faded, the impact of his decade-long fight against illness, his unwavering resilience in the face of adversity, and his meticulous planning for Apple's future ensured that the company he built would not only survive but continue to thrive. His final act of leadership was to secure the legacy of the company he had created, demonstrating that even in his greatest personal challenge, his vision for Apple remained paramount. Chapter 12: The Legacy: An Enduring Impact on Technology and Culture. On October 5, 2011, the world mourned the passing of Steve Jobs. The outpouring of grief was unprecedented for a technology executive. Tributes flowed from heads of state, industry icons like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, and countless individuals whose lives had been subtly yet profoundly reshaped by his vision. Apple stores around the globe became spontaneous shrines, adorned with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes, a testament to the emotional connection people felt to the products he created, and by extension, to the man himself. His death at just 56 closed the chapter on a life extraordinary for its innovation, its ambition, and its indelible mark on the human experience. Steve Jobs' legacy is not simply about inventing new products. It's about transforming entire industries and, in doing so, fundamentally changing the way people interact with technology and with each other. Personal computing. He didn't invent the personal computer, but through the Macintosh, he made it accessible and intuitive. He insisted on a graphical user interface and a mouse, democratizing computing beyond hobbyists and engineers, making it a tool for everyday creativity. His constant demand for elegant design and ease of use pushed the entire industry forward. Music. With the iPod and the iTunes Music Store, Jobs revolutionized the music industry. He provided a legal, elegant solution to the chaos of digital piracy, convincing a resistant music business to sell songs for 99 cents and putting 1,000 songs in your pocket. He redefined how music was curated, consumed, and monetized. Mobile telephony. The iPhone was perhaps his most revolutionary act. It wasn't just a phone. It was a compact, powerful computer in your hand that redefined an entire industry. Its multi-touch interface, and, crucially, the App Store, unleashed a torrent of creativity and economic activity, creating an entirely new ecosystem of mobile applications that permeate every aspect of modern life. Tablet computing. The iPad, initially met with skepticism, created and dominated the tablet market, offering a new form factor for content consumption, creativity, and casual computing, ushering in what Jobs termed the post-PC era. Animation. By purchasing and nurturing Pixar, Jobs transformed the animation industry, pioneering computer-generated animation and proving that technological innovation could serve breathtaking artistic expression, culminating in a string of critical and commercial blockbusters. Retail. The Apple stores, initially mocked by retail experts, became the most profitable retail spaces per square foot in the world. They re-envisioned the retail experience, focusing on product discovery, customer interaction, and service rather than just sales, profoundly influencing retail design globally. Beyond specific products, Jobs' enduring influence lies in his deeply ingrained principles. Design as philosophy. His unwavering commitment to simplicity, elegance, and intuitive user experience became a benchmark not just for technology, but for product design across myriad industries. His famous mantra of less but better permeates modern design thinking. Vertical integration. His belief that controlling hardware, software, and services was the only way to deliver truly magical and seamless products became a model for companies seeking end-to-end user satisfaction. Innovation through vision. He consistently pushed the boundaries of what was possible, not by conducting market research, but by trusting his own instincts and forcing his teams to follow his uncompromising vision. He didn't give people what they asked for, he gave them what they didn't know they needed. The Steve Jobs method. His leadership style, though often controversial for its demanding and abrasive nature, proved remarkably effective. He assembled 8 teams, fostered intense competition, and used his reality distortion field to inspire extraordinary feats of engineering and creativity. However, no assessment of Steve Jobs would be complete without acknowledging his complexities and criticisms. He was accused of taking credit for others' inventions, such as the graphical user interface from Xerox PARC or even the early Apple computers primarily designed by Wozniak. His personal conduct, from denying paternity of his first daughter to his famously harsh treatment of employees, earned him a reputation as an often difficult, even cruel, individual. Yet, even his harshest critics often conceded that his flaws were inextricably linked to his genius, that the same drive for perfection that made him a demanding boss also enabled him to create products of unparalleled quality. In the end, Steve Jobs left behind more than just a company or a line of best-selling products. He left a philosophy, a way of approaching problems, of thinking about the relationship between technology and humanity. His Stanford commencement speech, delivered in 2005, became a rallying cry for entrepreneurs and innovators globally. Stay hungry, stay foolish. It captured the essence of his relentless drive, his willingness to challenge conventions, and his belief in the power of the individual to make a profound impact. Steve Jobs was an imperfect genius, a shaman of Silicon Valley who, through sheer force of will, taste, and conviction, dragged the future into the present. His life serves as a compelling narrative about the transformative power of vision, the brutal demands of innovation, and the enduring legacy of one man who dared to think differently. The world he envisioned, a world where powerful technology felt effortless and intuitive, is the world we inhabit today, a testament to his undeniable and everlasting mark on our collective human story.